everyone, and welcome. So let's talk about video games. For a long time, we've had this image, right? A teenager in a dark basement. But what if I told you that's an ancient stereotype? The reality is that video games have quietly become one of the most powerful social and cultural forces on the entire planet. So let's jump in and see just how massive this world has really become. Let's start with just one number to kind of wrap our heads around this. 3.32 billion. That is the number of active video gamers in the world. Seriously, this isn't some niche hobby anymore. It's more than a third of the Earth's population. We're not talking about a subculture. This is a dominant global culture. So how on earth did we get here? Well, that's what we're going to break down. We're going to start with gaming's wild journey from the fringe right into the heart of the mainstream. Then we'll get into its massive ripple effect on, well, pretty much everything. We'll tackle that huge debate. Do games connect us, or do they just isolate us? Then we'll explore how they're being used for so much more than entertainment. And finally, we'll dive into the big one. Can a video game actually be a work of art? All right, first up, the incredible rise of gaming. This isn't just a story about technology. It's about how a tiny subculture exploded into a major cultural force that, touches almost every part of our lives today. You know what's really wild is just how fast this all happened. I mean, in the 70s, gaming communities were basically just a few programmers huddled around a machine playing stuff like Space War. Then, boom, the 80s hit, and suddenly characters like Super Mario are becoming household names, right up there with movie stars. Fast forward to the 2000s, and suddenly the average gamer is 35 years old. That whole teenager stereotype, totally obsolete. And by the 2010s, what we used to call geek culture wasn't just accepted, it was cool. It became a huge part of the mainstream. And if you need one perfect, kind of hilarious fact to illustrate this whole shift, get this. A poll in Canada back in 2007 found that more Canadians could identify a picture of Super Mario than their own prime minister. Think about that. When a fictional plumber is more famous than the leader of a G7 nation, you know you're dealing with an absolute cultural juggernaut. Okay, so if gaming is that big, what's its impact on everything else? Well, in this next section, we're going to see how the tables have completely turned. It used to be that games were inspired by movies and TV. Not anymore. Now, gaming is one of the main things driving pop culture. Just look at television. The game Pokémon, right? It started on the little Nintendo Game Boy and then just exploded into this monster TV series that basically defined childhood for a whole generation. It wasn't just some show. It was a cultural phenomenon that all started with a game. And in the world of film, it's just as powerful. We've got blockbusters like Lara Croft Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie. These movies didn't just make a little money, they dominated the box office. It was proof that video game franchises had the star power to go head-to-head with Hollywood's biggest names. And what about music? Oh, this is one of my favorites. Video game soundtracks have gone from these simple little beeps and boops to these massive, complex orchestral scores. And they're created by A-list composers. We're talking about titans like Hans Zimmer, the guy who did the music for The Dark Knight and Inception, now composing these epic scores for major video games. It's incredible. Now here's a connection you probably did not see coming. Heritage. The Royal Armouries Museum in the UK has a firearms expert whose job now includes consulting with video game developers. Why? Because gamers demand that historical details are accurate, and his seal of approval is like the gold standard. A museum is literally shaping one of the biggest entertainment industries in the world. How cool is that? Okay, so games are a massive cultural force. We've established that. But this brings us to the really important question, the one that's been debated for decades. Do they actually bring us together, or do they just push us further apart into isolation? So on one side of this argument, you've got the clinical perspective. And it's serious. Internet gaming disorder, or IGD, is officially recognized. It's a behavioral addiction where playing games becomes so compulsive that it genuinely starts to damage a person's life. And the consequences of this are very, very real. We're talking about strained relationships with family, pulling away from friends entirely, grades plummeting at school, and a real decline in physical health and even basic things like personal hygiene. For some people, the virtual world really can start to overshadow the real one. So those risks are absolutely real, and we have to acknowledge that. But is that the complete picture? Is gaming just an isolating activity at its core, or is there another side to the story?
This chart tells such a fascinating story. It comes from the COVID-19 pandemic. A study found that during the lockdowns, the importance of gaming for just social connection, it skyrocketed. I mean, when we couldn't physically be with each other, online games became this essential lifeline for people to stay connected with friends, with family, even with their coworkers. It wasn't causing isolation, it was a solution to it.
And sometimes that connection is way more profound than just hanging out. This quote here, it comes from an amazing story about a player in the game Guild Wars 2 who lost her home in a fire. When her online gaming community found out, they rallied. They raised thousands of dollars to help her rebuild her life. The game developers, they just set out to make a product, but what they accidentally built was a powerful support network. And that idea leads us perfectly into our next section, because games are now being designed with purposes that go way beyond just having fun. They're actually being built as these incredibly powerful tools for social good. Let me give you 3 amazing examples. First, education. There are now programs designed to help teachers use games in the classroom to teach literally everything from math to history. Second, empathy. Games like She Keeps Me Damn Alive put you directly into someone else's shoes, forcing you to see the world from the perspective of the Black trans community. It's incredibly powerful. And third, preservation. Remember when the Notre Dame Cathedral caught fire in 2019? Well, it turned out that Ubisoft's ridiculously detailed 3D model from the game Assassin's Creed was a potential resource for the real-world restoration, a video game helping to rebuild a World Heritage Site. And the applications are just so diverse. Even the US military has gotten on board, using these advanced game engines to create hyper-realistic simulators to train soldiers, preparing them for incredibly complex and dangerous situations they might face in the field. And so all of this, the cultural impact, the emotional depth, the technical brilliance, it brings us to our final, and maybe our most contentious question. Can a video game actually be considered a true work of art?
This question, it has been debated so fiercely for years. It really pits traditional art critics against this whole new generation of creators and players who see games as this incredible new frontier for artistic expression.
So the traditional argument, voiced most famously by the film critic Roger Ebert, was that games can't be art because, well, they're games. They have rules and goals and you're supposed to win them. But the counter-argument points to games like Flower. In that game, there's no score, there are no enemies, there's no winning or losing. You are simply the wind, guiding a trail of flower petals across a beautiful landscape. The goal isn't to win, it's just to feel something. It's designed from the ground up to be an emotional, interactive experience. So from a niche hobby to a global culture, from a supposed source of isolation to a powerful platform for connection, and from simple entertainment to maybe a new form of art, it's pretty clear the story of video games is far from over. In fact, you kind of get the feeling we're all just getting ready to press start.